The Truth Girls.
Hi everyone. Yesterday, October 2nd, a guy called Chris Harper Mercer went into Umpqua Community College in Roseburg, Oregon, and shot 9 people and injured 9 more. It has since then turned out that he was actually targeting Christians. People were lying on the floor and he actually asked them to stand up and state if they were Christians. And the people that stood up and said they were Christians, he shot them point blank. You could see something like this happening and automatically you would say, well, the guy had to be crazy. His own mother said that he was suffering with mental illness issues. So, I mean, clearly he had some issues. He had a blog and he had gotten kind of onto the topic of these mass shootings, and what he concluded was that, you know, this is a way to get fame. I get the feeling that he was just kind of what you call a loser. You know, he hadn't had any success with anything, he had no friends, he was very socially anxious, you know, probably really miserable and like angry, and he was just sort of maybe trying to figure out the meaning of life. And at a certain point he got onto this topic of shootings. He seemed to get kind of fixated on that, and he had been apparently possibly on the site called 4chan giving hints that he might actually do a school shooting. But what kind of mental illness would make you do this? Well, you can't say. I mean, people do things for different reasons. Lots of people have different kinds of mental illness. They never hurt anyone. This case did remind me, though, of Grant Acord, the teenager. Back in 2014, he was caught planning to bomb his school. And what he had was pandas. The reason I thought of this was because when I heard about the sound sensitivity, that's one of the things pandas can do. And some people think pandas is only for kids, but I don't think so. Maybe Oregon shooting and others aren't about mental illness, as in there's no point in singling out people with mental illness and banning them from owning guns and all that. You know, that's probably true, because there's lots of people who might have had a history, but that doesn't mean that they're a threat. And as they say, they constitute such a small percentage of the population that restricting their ability to have or carry guns probably wouldn't make much of a dent in the overall level of violent crime. But there's another thing. Look at his profile on, what's it called, Spiritual Passions. His name was Iron Cross 45. I find this interesting that on groups that he's in, it mentions magic and occult. And also in what kind of women he's looking for. Individuality, vampire, piercings, psychic, tattoos. Religious views, not religious but spiritual, pagan, Wiccan. It seems to me that he had an interest in the occult. I wouldn't blame that in and of itself, but I do think, if I could speak freely, that when you focus on the occult, if you become obsessed with the occult, it will have a negative effect on you. I mean, you want to focus on what you want to move towards, right? Because if you focus on the negative, you're going to move towards it anyway. And if you keep focusing on the devil instead of on the Lord, you're actually giving the devil more of a foothold. I think, especially if you are inclined to any kind of, you know, psychiatric issues, it's probably not a good idea to get involved in the occult. The occult, I think, could be like the final, I won't say nail in the coffin, but like the final thing that will like send you over the edge. I don't watch a lot of TV, but I'd recently gotten very interested in a series called A Haunting. It was very well made, and it was very interesting. And it was all about people who had paranormal activity in their house. And I know this is, you know, separate from an organic cause to mental illness like pandas or whatever else, you know. But something else that I'm looking at. These people had haunting in their house. A lot of times it started because somebody did renovations and this pissed off the ghosts. They don't like change. You know, and they feel like it's their place. And not only ghosts, but sometimes, you know, demons. one of the people in the family would start to sort of lose their mind. Like, they would have really big personality changes. And you got to see this show. I mean, if you want to see what happens, like, they would become very depressed, very negative, very hostile, aggressive, apathetic. A lot of really negative changes, which really looked like mental illness. But they were actually possessed. I know it sounds ridiculous because, geez, we want to move away from the Middle Ages when you blame mental illness on possession. But when you see that, you know, the guy's into the occult, knowing what I know now about hauntings and possessions, I would just say, you know, it's something to consider. And even if it has nothing to do with him, I just like to take this opportunity to warn you not to get involved with the occult. I'll tell you another thing. A few years ago, I did this video where I was like ghost hunting. I went to a cemetery and even took an EVP recording. Not something I'm ever going to do again. But the guy that I went with, a neighbor of my mother's, at the time, he was a nice guy. I felt so comfortable with him that I went out to the cemetery. Well, either he was, you know, a nice guy with no red flags, or I just have really bad judgment, which is the other possibility. But at the time, I didn't have the slightest worry, and I just went out into the night with this guy alone to the cemetery, and also into his basement. I never worried about anything. Well, he had uncovered a grave behind his house. He had disturbed it accidentally by lighting some sticks, you know, brush on fire, and he had cracked the headstone. He had also opened up the walls and renovated the place. And like I said, renovations will piss off the ghosts. And he had found some things in the walls, and he had started to have paranormal activity in his house, like boxes moving across the floor, doors opening, handles rattling, covers being pulled off the bed. He even saw the ghost standing in the driveway. And what happened was that after that, over the course of the next 2 years, his mental state seems to have deteriorated severely. I mean, he's been arrested. He's been in trouble with the law a few times. There's a long list of complaints against him in the town. He was aggressive with some people. I mean, the guy seems to have just completely lost it. Beats up his girlfriend and everything. And I realized that, you know, maybe what happened was, you know, maybe he had some problems to begin with, but I think that when he opened up the door to the occult and the paranormal, he really opened the door to the devil or some demonic stuff. I think he's possessed. And this is why I don't investigate the occult, the paranormal. And I think that it's a very dangerous thing for people to do. You know, if you're a loner and you're miserable and you're alienated socially, I guess there's some allure for those people. You know, the occult and the vampire and all that has some allure, but I would recommend that you stay away from it, because it's just going to alienate you more, and you know, you might even end up possessed. I really do believe, you know. I mean, he went into that room and asked them, who's a Christian? I mean, he says he's spiritual but not religious. That doesn't sound spiritual to me, not in a good way. Not what he did. He says, you know, he's not religious, but he goes in there and looks for Christians and shoots them dead. Coincidence? Yeah, I don't think so. I think the guy had opened some kind of doors. Could he have also had a mental illness? Could he have even had an infection-triggered mental illness like pandas, like Grant Acord, who tried to blow up his school? You know, it's possible. But I think that the spiritual can definitely play a role also. Anyway, again, I'm sad to see this happening. And you know, let's pray for the families of the victims. You know, and let's remember to, you know, stay out of the dark shadows. You know, you want to focus on the Lord. You want to focus on the light. You don't want to focus on the darkness. I don't care who you are. You don't want to do that. It seems that the result is never good. So let me know what you think. Thanks for giving this video a thumbs up. Thanks for listening to me. I'll see you next time.